In 1978, American factories built 18,000 small airplanes in a single year. Last year, fewer than 1,800. In 1980, this country had 827,000 pilots. Today, the active private pilot population is around 174,000, and the average airplane at your local field is 52 years old, older than most of the people flying it. Back then, a sign painter could buy a brand new 150 from the factory for under $13,000 and fly it home on 57-cent fuel. Today, that airplane costs $500,000, the license costs $20,000, and the fuel has an expiration date. General Aviation didn't die of natural causes. This is the story of what killed it. To understand what killed General Aviation, you have to go back to the moment it was strongest, the late 1970s. Cessna, Piper, and Beech are cranking out airplanes like Detroit cranks out cars. The 152, the PA-38 Tomahawk, the 172, affordable trainers filling every ramp in America. And then the lawsuits started. Here's how it worked. A pilot flies a perfectly good airplane into a mountain. Pilot error, plain and simple. But the pilot doesn't have money, the manufacturer does. So the family sues Cessna or Piper or Beech for an airplane built 20, 30, 40 years earlier. And juries, looking at a grieving widow on one side and a corporation on the other, pay out millions. The manufacturers built their airplanes too well. That was the problem. Airplanes from the 1940s were still flying, which meant every airplane a company had ever built was a lawsuit waiting to happen. They called it the liability tail, and it never ended. The numbers are almost unbelievable. Between 1983 and 1986, Beech defended itself against 203 lawsuits at an average cost of $530,000 each. And the NTSB found that not a single one of those accidents traced back to a design or manufacturing defect. Not one. One Piper dealer from that era put it in the simplest terms. In 1979, Piper's product liability insurance cost $56 per airplane. 2 years later, it was over $70,000 per airplane. A 4-seat single that used to sell for $44,000 now lost money at 3 times that price. So the industry did the only thing it could. Piper went bankrupt. Beech shut down almost everything except the Bonanza and the Baron. And in 1986, Cessna, the largest builder of light aircraft on Earth, stopped making piston airplanes entirely. By 1994, American production had fallen from 18,000 airplanes a year to 928, a 95% collapse. The affordable trainer was dead, and it was about to get a funeral that promised a resurrection, and never delivered one. In 1994, Congress finally acted. The General Aviation Revitalization Act, GARA, a simple deal. Manufacturers could no longer be sued over airplanes more than 18 years old. The liability tail was cut. Cessna's CEO, Russ Meyer, stood up and made a promise. Pass this law, and Cessna would restart its piston lines. He went further. He projected 2,000 piston airplanes a year rolling out of Cessna factories. Congress passed it, the president signed it, and Cessna kept exactly half its promise. The lines did restart. In 1997, the 172 and the 182 came back, and the 206 followed a year later. But the numbers? In 1999, Cessna built fewer than 900 piston singles. It took 5 years just to hit the 2,000 airplane mark in total, and the rest of the lineup, the 152, the Cardinal, the 310, the 402, the Twins, never came back. Not one of them. To this day, worse, the airplanes that did return came back at prices nobody recognized. The whole argument for GARA was that killing the lawsuits would kill the liability costs baked into every airframe. Instead, prices went up sharply in the years right after the law passed because the manufacturers had learned something during the dark years. Why build thousands of cheap trainers for school teachers when you can build hundreds of turboprops and jets for corporations and make more money doing it? Cessna's real business became the Citation. Beech's became the King Air. The piston lines survived as an afterthought, priced for flight schools and the wealthy. And here's the wound that never healed. Nobody ever replaced the cheap 2-seat trainer. The 152 left the market in 1985. 40 years later, there is still no modern, affordable, mass-produced equivalent. One subscriber nailed the math. Somebody would need to crank out 2,000 172s a year to bring prices back down. Nobody ever will. The industry got its rescue. The average pilot got left behind. So what does 40 years of that look like on your wallet? Let's run the numbers. Then versus now, learning to fly. In the mid-70s, a 150 rented for $14 an hour wet. and the instructor charged less than a pizza. Pilots from that era finished their private license for $1,500. One guy did it on paper route savings. Today, the trainer rents for $170 to $220 an hour. The instructor is another $75 to $90, and a realistic budget for a private certificate is $14,000 to $20,000. One new pilot finished last month at $22,000. Buying an airplane. In 1972, a Cherokee 140 cost $9,899, while college tuition ran $90 a semester. Today, a new 172 lists at $600,000 and up, and the used market got dragged up with it. Even tired 1960s airframes ask $50,000, and a decent 1990s example runs well into six figures. And then comes keeping it. One pilot said it plainly: the airplane takes a quarter to a third of his annual income, and it's the fixed costs that kill you. The annual inspection you pay whether you fly or not, the hangar you waited 3 years to get, the engine overhaul fund, because when that clock runs out, the bill can be worth more than the airframe. And even if you have the money, good luck scheduling the work. A&P mechanics are retiring faster than they're being replaced, so airplanes sit grounded for weeks waiting for a wrench. Here's the part that stings. Adjusted for inflation, that $13,000 airplane from 1975 should cost about $84,000 today. It costs 5 times that. This isn't inflation. Wages stayed flat while flying went vertical. The middle class didn't leave aviation. Aviation left the middle class. Now let's talk about the killer almost nobody covers, the one your engine drinks. Virtually the entire piston fleet runs on 100LL. The LL stands for low lead, and that word lead is the problem. 100LL is the last leaded transportation fuel still sold in the United States. Cars gave it up 50 years ago. Airplanes never did, because those high-compression engines designed in the 1950s and 60s need the octane, and lead is how they get it. At the pump, it already hurts. $5 to $8 a gallon, averaging around $6.50, with small rural fields charging $8.50 or more. A 182 burning 13 gallons an hour is spending $85 an hour on gas alone. Remember, this fleet was built in the era of 57-cent fuel, but price isn't the real threat, the clock is. The EPA has formally declared that lead emissions from piston aircraft endanger public health, the legal trigger that starts the countdown to elimination. The industry's own plan targets an unleaded fleet by 2030. That's 4 years away. And here's the math that should terrify every owner of a high-performance single. About 70% of all avgas is burned by the 30% of the fleet that cannot run the existing unleaded alternatives. The guy in a 150 with an autogas approval? He'll be fine. The guy who spent $450,000 on a Bonanza, a 210, a turbocharged Saratoga? He's the one with nowhere to go. The transition is already stumbling. The University of North Dakota, one of the biggest flight schools in the country, switched its 100-airplane fleet to unleaded, flew 46,000 hours, found valve seat damage in its Lycoming-powered Archers and PA-44 Seminoles, and went back to leaded fuel. A full fleet unleaded replacement now exists on paper, but it costs more. It's barely distributed, and thousands of small airports would each need to spend over $100,000 on a second fuel system to carry both during the transition. Most of them simply won't. So picture the owner who survived everything so far. He paid the inflated price. He found the hangar. He absorbed the maintenance, and now the fuel his engine was certified for in 1962 has an expiration date. The clock is ticking on every tank in America. If the money doesn't get you and the fuel doesn't get you, the system will. And it comes for you in order. First, they take your insurance. Then they take your airport. Start with the insurance, because this is how GA loses the pilots it already has. The people who own most of America's fleet are in their 60s and 70s, and the insurance industry has decided it doesn't want them. Underwriters start penalizing age around 70, some as early as 65 for anything complex. Premiums climb every renewal. Liability limits shrink. By 80, they'll demand annual check rides, medical evaluations, a safety pilot in the right seat, or they'll simply decline to quote. One story from the channel comments says it all. A pilot in his 70s. Excellent health, a clean medical, no restrictions, not even glasses. His insurer of many years doubled his premium and added a requirement that he could only fly with another licensed pilot on board. His words, he had fewer privileges than a 15-hour student. Others just gave up, sold the 210 after 40 years, sold the Baron, walked away. And when the pilots walk away, The airports follow, because an airport full of grounded airplanes is an airport that stops defending itself. And there's a line of people waiting for that land. Santa Monica, over 100 years old, one of the most historic fields in America, closes forever on December 31st, 2028, to become a park. Reed Hillview in San Jose is being pushed toward early closure with leaded fuel as the weapon. And at the fields that survive, the welcome mat is being pulled too. Pilots were federally mandated to install ADS-B tracking equipment by 2020 at their own expense. And now over 100 airports use that same equipment to automatically bill landing fees. One pilot got an invoice in the mail for a touch and go at a non-towered field. He called it his tipping point and sold the airplane. That's the squeeze. Fewer insured pilots, flying to fewer airports, paying more for the privilege each time. Walk any small-town ramp today, and you'll see where it ends. Faded tie-down ropes, flat tires, airplanes rotting in the sun. One mechanic who spent a career visiting hundreds of small airports described most of them with 2 words: ghost towns. Now here's where the story takes a turn, because the official numbers say General Aviation is booming. Record deliveries, $35.7 billion last year, the highest ever. Flight schools packed. GA flying more hours than it has in years. So how can it be dying? Look closer. The billions are business jets, turboprops, King Airs, Caravans, machines for corporations. And those packed flight schools? Instructional flying has doubled in a decade, from 4 million to over 8 million hours a year. But those students aren't joining GA. They're passing through it, grinding toward the airlines as fast as possible. One airline captain says that in 2004, half the pilots at his carrier still kept a piston rating. Today, it's under 10%. And the everyday pilots, the ones this world was built for, they didn't quit flying. They escaped. They went to experimentals, build an RV in your garage, do your own maintenance, skip the certified price tag. They went to Part 103 ultralights. No medical, no registration. One commenter walked away from the 172 after 10 hours, bought a paramotor for $9,000 plus $2,000 of training. His words, "I feel like an eagle up there." Another took up hang gliding at 69. Others went to gliders, gyroplanes, or a $500 flight simulator, because that's what's left of the dream. Even the FAA has quietly admitted the certified world failed, with new rules expanding what sport pilots can fly. So no, General Aviation didn't vanish. The top half became an industry for the wealthy. The bottom half fled to the margins. What died is the thing in the middle. The school teacher's Cherokee, the electrician's 150, the idea that an ordinary American could own the sky. One pilot gave it the perfect name. Don't call it General Aviation anymore. Call it Gilded Aviation. The airplanes are still out there. The runways are still paved. The sky over your town hasn't changed at all. What changed is everything around it. Repriced, restricted, and rewritten, one quiet decision at a time, until the average person was no longer welcome. Nobody signed the death certificate. The lawyers, the manufacturers, the insurers, the regulators, each just did what made sense for them. And together, they killed something that was never supposed to be exclusive. Because that was the whole idea of General Aviation. Not jets, not corporations, the freedom to fly, for anyone willing to work for it, save for it, and earn it. If you lived this story, if you flew when it was $14 an hour, or you're trying to start today at $220, tell us in the comments which one of these killed it for you, because the people who remember what this was are the only ones who can say what it should have been.